When first writing this article, that was to become this video, I thought for a while about what section of my blog this would fit in best, and it was very difficult to settle on any one section. The reason for my troubles was that assumption is responsible for so many of the problems that we have as aware beings on this earth. Whenever we assume something, when we take it for granted that a certain thing is this way or that, we narrow the scope of our awareness and fight to the death to defend the assumption that we have just made. To assume something is really to believe something without question, without any logical thought at all. It is fair to start by saying that the author of this video defines reason as the act of making assumptions, and logic as something else altogether. He does this because he finds assumption to be a very reasonable act, but not a very logical one. The author, video maker, idiot, or whatever else you would like to call him, likes to separate reason and logic in this way, because he believes that it is quite easy to see that an individual is considered reasonable and rational, when this individual is able to believe without question the beliefs that are held by the status quo, that is, they can easily believe what is generally believed by everyone around them, and are reasonably acting in accordance to those borrowed beliefs. To be a person of reason is to be someone who is rational and therefore not labeled insane, because to not be insane a person must believe, or at least convincingly act like they believe, what everyone else who believes what is supposed to be believed, believes. And yet, the world is full of things that can only be assumed to be true by the average person, and that cannot be proven to be absolute truths, even by those that consider themselves experts. It is interesting to note though that most people act as if what they believe is absolute and unquestionable truth, often quoting what some authority figure said, who might or might not deserve such praise and trust. In the best of cases, an authority figure like the one postulated will be someone, or a group of someones, who has done his, her, or their due diligence, and have used observation, experimentation, logic, and calculation to arrive at a certain premise. Unfortunately, though this is seldom the case, and even when it is, these authority figures quite often, knowingly or not, imbue a sense of finality upon the premises and theories that they expound. But logic is a complex science, or system, if you like that term better. And within it, like any science that is worthy to be called a science, there is no room for absolute truths, only possibilities. Perhaps this sense of absolute truth comes from Socrates and the Socratic method of logic called deduction. Within this type of logical calculation, premises are placed one beneath the other, and if all premises presented are true, then the final conclusion must also be true. Deduction is a fundamental, and very powerful, form of logical calculation. But it is an easy mistake to believe that you are dealing with fundamental and unchangeable truths as you work with it, because deduction requires that all its premises be true, so that it can then point to what is an unequivocally true conclusion. But as man, using science and other means, explores greater and greater realms of reality, he is confronted with the uncomfortable awareness that there are no absolutes, that this universe is too vast and too mysterious to fit into some simplistic, mechanistic model, that there is more to this world than can be dreamt of by any human philosophy. Fortunately, Francis Bacon came along and provided science with a different form of logical calculation. A type of logical calculation that is called induction. And in the process, possibly saved Western science and philosophy from nihilistic stagnation. With this type of logical calculation, there are no absolute truths, there is only probability, and as such, the final premise or conclusion is also not an absolute truth, it is only a possibility. All modern science should be based on this model of logical calculation. And even when we engage in deductive calculation, it is far more elegant and correct to say and realize that each premise is not an absolute truth, it is only a probability that can then lead us to a possible possibility that exists within the bounds of a certain environment. But this possibility, or conclusion, is not an absolute, because no conclusion is beyond question and change. So when some scientist or other authority figure exclaims, global warming, the theory of evolution, or life on Europa, is an absolute truth that can't be denied, this person is not being a true scientist, expert, or even logical. These kinds of people are quite often biased pundits who are out to try and force an issue, at the cost of true scientific inquiry. Reason seems logical when you assume that all the beliefs that you have are facts, but fact, or truth as some like to call it, is only a really strongly held belief that some people think is beyond question. As a rebuttal to this craziness, a rationalist might point out that axioms, which are the basis for logical reasoning, which are defined as being a statement or proposition, that are regarded as self-evidently true, would qualify as assumptions. And you would be right in that. An axiom can be said to be a well-calculated assumption. But an axiom is not logic, it is a postulate, a probability if we remember back to inductive logic, that is used to narrow the scope of logical focus, in order to calculate, and therefore achieve a certain type of logical process or condition. But logic stands above the axiom, and a truly logical person needs to see that axioms allow us to access different subsets of logic, but they are not logic in and of themselves. Axioms are tools, scaffolding upon which our minds might rest for a little bit, but quickly move forward into new greater territories. They are a component of logic, they are not logic in and of themselves. Axioms are scaffolding that must be used sometimes when necessary, but they must never be turned into permanent structures. Certainly, there are occasions when some people might feel justified in assuming that this or that idea is completely correct and beyond question, because this fact, which is in reality just a strongly held belief, as had been mentioned earlier, is given to them by some type of seemingly irrefutable authority or establishment. But really what we are doing when we assume is that we take something for granted, because doing so has been profitable, in other words correct, in some way for us in the past. Even if this profit only amounts to not being ridiculed, or not ending up in some kind of loony bin. Logic in its purest form holds no facts. There are only possibilities and probabilities that can be followed in order to discover greater probabilities and possibilities. There are theories, and there are experiments that reap certain conclusions and benefits, but there are no facts, because fact is based on the assumption that perception is infallible. But logic tells us that human perception at least is fallible because of its limited scope. And as such, there is always the possibility that there is an unperceived force that is beyond our awareness, that could be affecting external circumstances in a powerful and as of yet unrealized way. In other words, there are no closed systems in real life, everything is chaos, in the most mathematical way.
Reason is a lie, for there is a factor infinite and unknown, and all their words are skew-wise.
Assumption can be wonderful at times, it can allow us to function much more quickly, and as I said, it can help you fit in. Generally speaking, we all tend to assume a lot, and doing so allows us to function much more effectively within society, because we do not need to question every single thing that we do, or are about to do. Assumptions, in other words, can be good. For example, it is generally a good assumption to believe that you are in a safe place, and will wake up in a safe place in the morning, or that certain things will work just like they have always worked. Assumptions like that one allows us to feel good, and as a result we can function more effectively and feel better. To not have such an assumption might make us paranoid, and we might even end up being classified as insane. Which would then of course mean that we would need to be medicated and perhaps restrained, until we began to form more correct assumptions, that are more in accordance with the assumptions of the status quo. This video though is interested in some of the negative aspects of assumption, and the reason for the video is to point out that human beings naturally tend to assume things, and that it is much harder for any of us to question these assumptions. Questioning takes effort, while assumption takes no effort at all, it only takes repetition, by those that we consider to be of authority. The objective of the video is to have you consider doing something very clever, or some might say insane, and that is, question your assumptions. I finally settled on the idea that this article belongs in the paranormal section. Indeed, it needs to be in the paranormal section, because one of the most disparaging aspects of assumption is its ability to control how we perceive. This is very important because our perception is key to everything. When we perceive differently, we see different things. When we perceive differently than those around us, we are witness to the paranormal, the occult, the hidden. When we think of the paranormal, we think of ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, and perhaps magic or some kind of sorcery. These things are in essence the occult. But the occult is just that which is hidden, and it is hidden from us because of our inability to perceive it. Assumption equals perception. Our perception is the key to everything paranormal. I am often asked how it is possible to extend our personal awareness. How can one be able to see and experience more of the magic all around us? How can one experience the paranormal? I was asked so often actually, that I wrote a book on the subject. If you are interested, the book is titled The Occult Experience. You can find it in the Kindle store and I will leave a link to it in the video description below. Now, while the book might give you a very detailed way to identify and break the barriers of your personal perceptions, one could quite easily say that the heart of all our troubles, when it comes to our very limited sensual capabilities, is our insistence on making and maintaining assumptions. Indeed, if you are able to internalize this, and act on it, you might not need the book at all to find the paranormal all around you. If you have ever come across a hardcore skeptic in anything, then you have run smack dab into someone who is very good at making and maintaining assumptions. They assume that what they believe is the only truth, and this assumption is so strong, it is so overpowering, that it does not allow that person to see your personal views as anything more than delusion. Assumption is so powerful, that it totally overrides logic. And those that are passionately ruled by their assumptions, tend to be so adamant, that they will argue and sometimes even hurt you, in order to try and prove to you that their particular subset of logic, in other words that their reason, is correct. Assumption in many ways, can be referred to as a routine of thought. We are so used to believing that a certain thing is so, we have done this certain thing so many times before, that it is quite natural for us to assume that things will always be the same, and that there is no other way than what is going on at the moment. These routines though can bind us, they can narrow our perception, and make us believe that the limited world that we see, out there, is all there is. A ghost could not possibly be real, because in a consistent basis we have not seen them. Those around us that are rational like us have not seen them. Those that we trust, like scientists and priests, to find answers to the riddles of life, have not seen them either. Therefore it is quite reasonable to assume that ghosts do not exist, and are but delusions of people that are highly unreasonable, which is really a code word for liars, idiots, and the insane. Our reasoning can seem so reasonable when we don't doubt our assumptions. But there is more to life, and there is more to human reality. All we have to do is break through the barrier of our assumptions, and doing this is as easy. Please note the sarcasm emoticon, as questioning all those things that we think are beyond question. Breaking the barrier of human perception begins by questioning all our assumptions.